Hello, everybody, and welcome to the revision session for lecture 5. Okay, we did have a live lecture on lecture 5 where I'm just going to go over it so that everybody's on the same page. So we are going to be talking about sport facilities management, starting with the facility planning. So facility planning will be broken down into two phases for this lecture, preliminary planning as well as the master plan. So what is preliminary planning? So this is the very beginning of your planning process. Okay, so this is where you identify the need for a facility. That's step number one, program analysis. So you first of all need to identify that there is a need for a facility. Once you have identified that need, you then need to check if it's feasible to build that facility. So you investigate the idea for the facility and the concept and decide if you have enough of everything to build that facility. You then need to um, come up with a planning committee, identify some key individuals who will be important for the project, and then select an architect. So once you've done all that, you then need to come up with a master plan because remember now you have a planning team and that team now needs to answer the who, what, where, when, why, and how much for the master plan. Right, so the first thing you need to then do or include in your master plan is the site conditions or sustainability impact analysis. Okay, so what is it that the structure is going to look like? What are the architectural requirements, mechanically, electrically, plumbing factors? What is it that is going to affect this facility? What are the space requirements? How are you going to map it out? What is it going to look like? What are some of the financial issues that you are going to encounter or that are on the ground? Do you have enough sponsorship? Do you have enough finance to build the facility that you want or that you need? What are the legal parameters that you need to consider in this planning process? And also, you need to consider the management considerations for this facility. Once that has been done and you now have your master plan in hand, you can then move on to your facility design process. This is where you then allocate each space within the facility design to say that this is where we're going to play handball in this multipurpose hall. This is where we are going to play badminton. This is where we're going to have basketball. This is where we're going to have football and so on. So you allocate sport spaces in that facility. This is the soccer ground. This is where the people are going to sit. This is a VIP section. So that's the most important part of facility design. So once your spaces have been allocated, you can then come up with your floor plans and your layout is then developed. The next stage would then be your construction stage. This is where you create your detailed drawings and then have that very big groundbreaking party where people cut ribbons for no reason, and then you start your construction. Financial management is also a very important part of facility management because your facilities need to be capable of producing a profit. Remember, you might have some people who have invested in this facility with the belief that it has potential to give out a valuable return on investment. So then you need to grow their investments through this facility by producing a profit. Now let's look at some ownership structures for sport facilities. We had quite an interesting discussion about this, and we identified a number of stadiums where ownership is sometimes an issue. Okay, we said that it can be owned by a corporation, a number of corporations, or it could be owned by the public or the city. And we gave the example of FNP Stadium there, formerly known as Soweto Soccer City Stadium in Johannesburg. Right. Now, operations management, we've already gone into detail on what it is and what it consists of. this is also the function of the facility operations manager. Okay, so the sport facility operating procedures are put into place to provide a safe, efficient, and equitable functioning of the sport facility. What are some of these functions? Well, you need to be responsible for the programming and scheduling, as well as prioritizing the use and maintenance of the facility. Right, so the facility needs to be marketed. Sport marketing practices can be applied to the sport facility. However, while the sport facility is tangible, the product is intangible. So the facility manager must first of all understand the consumer. Who is your consumer? Do they have potential to be hooligans? Are they violent? Are they calm? What is it that they want out of this facility? Then you need to engage your sport marketing logistics in your sport facilities marketing management. And remember, you need to know how to do sales. You need to sell your tickets. You need to sell your facility so that events can be tempted to use it more. And then we had a very interesting and long discussion on white elephants, identifying particularly those two. Athens Stadium, Moses Mabhida Stadium. I think we also spoke about the DHL Stadium, which is Cape Town Stadium, and some of the interesting aspects and how they can be overcome. Right, so then we look at emergency and risk management. This is discussed in detail in lecture 7, so we'll just look at an overview. Risk is the possibility of loss from hazard such as personal injury, property damage, or economic loss. Risk cannot be eliminated, but it can be managed. And we gave you a formula there to kind of calculate your risk. All right, there are 3 major types of risks. There is function risks, there is asset risk, and security risks. Okay, the names are quite self-explanatory. A function risk is a risk that will deter or prevent how your company works. And that is a problem because then you cannot achieve your goals and then the company runs a financial loss. Your asset risk is risk that has the potential to harm your enterprise's assets. It could be your employees um, or any of the other infrastructural assets that you have. Your security risks are risks that can harm actual people or enterprise data. I have spoken at length about this diagram and I said I'll send it out as a separate document in your extra reading folder so that you can clearly see all the 7 steps. Right, so step number 1 is a step where you identify sport event security action. So you need to identify who your security personnel are going to be. You need to identify who's going to conduct the risk assessment. It's important to also notify your local emergency services and police so that they are on standby at all times around your facility. So that is your plan. And the second part is also part of the plan. Okay, you need to characterize or identify and put into groups or categories your assets. So your assets can include people that work in that facility. It could be your spectators as well. It could also be your athletes or equipment, infrastructure. Those are all your assets. And then your actionable levels or steps. Step number 3 is a threat assessment. You need to identify the potential threats to your facility. For example, a disorderly crowd, hooliganism, fraud, logistics, the weather, terrorism, etc. It's such a lot of things that could go wrong, and all those are threats. Nobody's saying it's going to happen, but it is a threat in any facility. So then you look at your vulnerability to those threats that you've identified. By that, we mean you look at your weaknesses. It could be weaknesses in the physical structures of the facility. It could be a weakness with your personnel. It could be a weakness with your preparedness. How is your emergency system functions? Do you have systematic emergency evacuation procedures in place? How is the access control, communication capabilities in case of emergencies, and so on. And then the next step there, step number 5, could be is the consequence evaluation, where you identify the potential consequences in the event that the threats that you've identified in step number 3 penetrate through your vulnerabilities and happen. All right, so what could be the consequences of these threats happening? For example, in the case of crowd disorder or assault, you might have loss of life, you might have social trauma, you might have infrastructural damage, which leads to a lot of financial issues, legal issues, and so on. So those are the consequences that we're looking at. So once you looked at that, you then do your risk assessment, and this brings us back to that calculation there. That risk is the probability of that risk happening and the severity of that uh, consequence that you've identified there. So once you have done that risk assessment, you can then come up with a way to reduce the consequences or to eliminate the risk completely. And that is step number 7. So I will send out a diagram, this diagram, um, in the original document that I drew in. I know the lines are a bit skew, but yeah, I hope it brings the message across. Right, so this is a discussion that we had in the class where we identified some global sport incidents. There is a website that you can look at to see some of these sport incidents. They're not pretty, but we need to be aware of them in order to be able to avoid them. We could also add COVID-19 there as one of the global sport incidents that actually affected sport in 2020, 2021, and the beginning of 2022. So, what are some of the legal issues that you might have to deal with as a sport facility manager? Right. So, in the event of negligence, okay, so let's say the threat you assessed and identified happens, then that means there has been some negligence because you identified it. Perhaps, for example, let's say you identified that one of your chairs is coming loose and you neglected it. You did not fix the issue, and that chair was then used to hit somebody in the head. So now there is a court case. So you are liable for negligence, and there are some legal ramifications for that. Similarly, with criminal law, you identified that your crowd was getting rowdy and you did nothing about it. Perhaps you could have notified law enforcement immediately. There are some other criminal law will apply in that instance. Contract law, contracts between the event and the facility, or contracts between the facility and its volunteers, contracts between the facility and its employees. Those are all very, very important. And marketing-based legislative issues, for example, ambush marketing, that's a big one. Okay, so you need to make sure that you are aware of the sponsors of the event so that ambush marketing can be prevented. Right, so we're going to take a brief look at project management. What is project management? Project management is the application of processes, methods, skills, knowledge, and so on that to achieve specific project objectives according to the criteria and the parameters that are set out for the project. All right, so what we have is something called a project charter, and this is used to improve. This is used to help you with the boundaries and output and outcomes of the project that is in progress. Okay, so first of all, you have a problem statement. Okay, so from our facilities planning section, you can clearly see that the problem statement belongs in the preliminary plan. Okay, so this is the part where you identify the need for a facility. So similarly, when you are compiling this project charter, you will first of all identify the problem or the need for that project, whether it is an event or a facility being built. That becomes a problem statement. You then make a business case for it. Is there a good reason for you to build this facility? Is there a good reason for you to have this event? What are the financial ramifications? Is it going to bring money into the community? Is it going to give money into the facility? How is it going to be useful business wise? What is the goal? Why are you doing this? What is the target? And so on. Right, so this is the basic sport project life cycle, starting with that business case, which is step number one there. Right, that's known as the initiation stage. You then have the planning stage, which is after you have decided to go on with the project, you then need to identify the scope of the project. How big is it going to be? What are some of the milestones that we are going to monitor? Milestones being points or markers that will be used to assess the progress of that project. So let's say, for example, the first milestone for a facility being built is that in the next 6 months, there must be poles that are erected in the in the area or the space that has been allocated for the facility. So after 6 months, you will then go and check if those poles are there. If they are there, then that milestone has been achieved. So your project then can progress like that. Execution is the actual work being put into that project. And finally, the closure is after the project has been concluded and what happened, you then evaluate what happened, what went wrong, what went right, what can be fixed for the future, and so on. Right, so that is just a summary of the lecture that we had. It was a long lecture. I've recorded an audio over the PowerPoint slides and put it onto our Google Drive. I think that will give you more information instead of just this brief summary. Perhaps you can use that, but I'll post this as well for your own interests. All right, thank you so much for your time. We'll see each other again soon. Bye bye.